All right, so you've shared quite a complex set of documents with us today. They all center around a Gulf War veteran, Daniel Wall, and some pretty serious allegations he's making against the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs.
That's right. And our job here, really, in this deep dive, is to try and pull out the most important bits from all these sources. His briefing document, his own research notes, those emails with Ona, and that scientific paper citation.
Yeah, the goal is to piece together a clear picture for you, our listeners. We want to help understand Mr. Wall's claims, what they're based on, and frankly, why they might be significant beyond just his individual case.
Exactly. We'll touch on his main points about medical negligence related to Gulf War illness,
Okay.
the science he brings up about organophosphate exposure and the immune system,
Right, the OP link.
his specific, often troubling interactions with the VA medications, denied care, that kind of thing.
And also these national security concerns he raises, which sound quite alarming.
They are. These are heavy allegations, no doubt about it. So getting a handle on the details is really key today.
Okay, let's start unpacking the core claims then. As we said, Daniel Wall, Gulf War veteran, and he's alleging not just isolated mistakes, but systemic medical negligence. Even uses the term malfeasance.
Yes, and the central pillar of his argument is the VA's alleged failure. A failure to properly recognize, diagnose, and treat Gulf War Syndrome GWS and related conditions he suffers from.
And he draws a direct line, doesn't he, from his time at Prince Sultan Air Base, PSAB, back in '96.
Right, specifically to exposure to organophosphate pesticides there. He connects that exposure directly to his chronic gastrointestinal issues, the constant pain, the fatigue he experiences now.
What's really striking is the mechanism he proposes. He argues the VA is overlooking established science about how these organophosphates, these OPs, mess with the immune system.
Precisely. He hones in on how they can impair the body's ability to take up choline.
Choline, right. And the knock-on effect is more IL-6.
That's his argument. Increased IL-6 proliferation, leading to immune dysfunction. He states it very directly in his briefing. Let me find the quote. Here. OP exposure is known to impair choline uptake, leading to IL-6 proliferation and immune dysfunction. My medical history aligns with these findings, yet VA has failed to acknowledge or properly diagnose these conditions.
So he's saying the science fits, his body fits the science, but the VA isn't making the connection.
That's the core of it. And it's not just about diagnosis. He also raises serious questions about his treatment. Specifically, the VA prescribing topiramate for anxiety.
Which he calls an unusual and questionable choice.
Exactly. And he believes, tragically, that this drug triggered a devastating reaction, toxic epidermal necrolysis, or TEN.
10. That's a horrific skin condition, isn't it? Life-threatening.
Extremely serious, yes. His quote on this is stark. VA prescribed topiramate for anxiety. Topiramate triggered a life-threatening reaction, toxic epidermal necrolysis, TEN. So the stakes he's describing are incredibly high.
And it gets worse. He also claims he was denied emergency care when he needed it most.
Yes, he alleges the Asheville VA actually blocked his access to ER services, put his life in danger, he says.
And there was that incident at a non-VA hospital, too.
Right. He describes being forcibly removed from a non-VA ER while, in his words, suffering from TEN. Again, quoting him, Asheville VA has blocked my access to ER services. A non-VA ER forcibly removed me. It paints a really disturbing picture.
Then there are the allegations about his medical records. This seems particularly serious.
Extremely. He claims records of that ER visit, the one related to the TEN reaction where he says he was denied treatment, were actually erased.
Erased? From where?
Both local systems and the federal database, according to him. His statements are very direct. VA erased records of my ER visit where I was denied treatment despite being in a medical crisis, and subsequently, VA erased the federal database record of this ER visit.
Wow. If that's true, that points to a deliberate cover-up.
It certainly implies that, yes. And he feels this fits into a broader pattern of the VA dismissing physical symptoms.
How so?
He argues they tend to weaponize psychiatric diagnoses, labeling veterans like him, who have legitimate physical complaints potentially linked to GWS, as paranoid or mentally ill.
So using a mental health label to sidestep the physical issues.
That's his contention.
Yeah.
He says VA attempts to label veterans as paranoid or mentally ill to dismiss legitimate medical complaints. It makes you think about how often that might happen.
He also raises concerns about research, doesn't he? And potential conflicts of interest.
Yes. Two main points there. First, he questions whether VA funding decisions might have actively suppressed independent research, particularly on that choline uptake mechanism in GWS.
Okay.
Second, he suggests possible collusion between the VA and drug companies regarding prescriptions he deems unsafe, like that topiramate. He explicitly calls for probes asking to investigate whether VA-controlled funding has suppressed independent studies and to examine potential collusion between VA and pharmaceutical companies.
And crucially, he doesn't think this is just about him.
Not at all. He's very clear that he believes his experience is representative of a systemic problem. He states, "This pattern extends beyond me and affects countless Gulf War veterans." That really broadens the scope significantly.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at the science he's putting forward. He's clearly done a lot of homework here.
He really has. He focuses heavily on that link between organophosphate exposure and immune dysfunction. And interestingly, he points to a specific study from 2015, El Demirdash et al., which looked at Nile tilapia.
Tilapia, fish.
Yeah.
How does that connect to humans and Gulf War illness?
Well, it's about the biological mechanism demonstrated. The study exposed these fish to an oki pesticide. What they found was disruptions in both nerve function, specifically inhibiting an enzyme called ACE, acetylcholinesterase, and the immune system.
So nerve and immune problems linked together.
Exactly. They saw signs of oxidative stress, neuroinflammation, changes in serum proteins suggesting immune dysregulation. So Mr. Wall sees this as evidence supporting the biological plausibility of OP exposure, causing similar interconnected problems in humans.
Okay, that makes sense, using it as an analogous model.
Right. And he extrapolates from that, arguing that in humans, this OP exposure impairs choline uptake.
Which leads to that increase in IL-6 we talked about.
Yes. And he suggests this IL-6 proliferation isn't just a single issue, it causes a cascade of problems. Immune system dysregulation, he mentions, potential IgM deficiency specifically.
Okay.
Chronic musculoskeletal pain, like myofascial pain syndrome, that persistent fatigue. And he even suggests a potential link to psychiatric symptoms like depression and suicidal thoughts. It's a complex, interconnected picture he's painting based on this IL-6 pathway.
And he has some personal experience that seems to back this up for him, with choline supplements.
He does mention that taking choline supplements himself had a positive effect on his cognitive function and chronic pain. It's anecdotal, of course, but it clearly reinforces his belief in this mechanism.
And he compiled all this into a scientific summary.
Yes, it's quite detailed in the documents. He goes into things like autoantibodies and AMPK signaling dysfunction. We can't unpack all of that here, but it definitely shows the depth he's gone to in researching the potential biological underpinnings.
So bringing it back to his specific VA interactions, we covered the topiramate and the 10 reaction.
Yeah.
What else stands out in his account of his care?
Well, there's the claim about prescriptions being filled against his explicit instructions by the Asheville VA.
Against his instructions.
That's what he alleges. And even more concerning, he claims they substituted one of his drugs with a systemic glucocorticoid without informing him.
A steroid. And why was that particularly bad?
Because he believes the topiramate reaction had already made his body hypersensitive to glucocorticoids' increased receptor levels, he suggests. So getting a systemic steroid unknowingly could have, in his view, significantly worsened his condition.
Okay, that's deeply concerning if true. And the ER access issues.
Yes, he reiterates being blocked from the VA ER and that forced removal from the non-VA ER during the 10 crisis. These accounts really highlight potential failures in providing urgent care.
And the alleged record erasure, he tried to report that.
He says he did, yes. But he claims his concerns were dismissed, possibly because he was just seen as a disabled veteran, perhaps implying they didn't think he'd understand the data systems well enough to know if something was wrong.
Even though he might have technical knowledge himself.
He sort of implies that, yes. And then there's that very bizarre and troubling claim about being, quote, literally punished by a VA committee.
Punished for what?
For responding to a suicide prevention message that the VA itself had sent him. It sounds like he felt penalized simply for engaging with their own outreach effort.
That seems counterintuitive, to say the least.
It does, and all this leads into the national security dimension he raises.
Right. In his messages with ONA, he makes this huge claim. Something about proving the VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, is a threat.
Yes. The exact phrase he used was that he proved to NSA director that the VHA is an imminent threat to national security. That's a massive claim.
What's his reasoning behind such a statement?
It seems to stem from his belief that the way the VA allegedly mistreats and potentially covers up issues with disabled veterans, especially those who might have held security clearances, creates a vulnerability. He fears that a veteran who feels betrayed, who holds sensitive information, well, They might become a target or, in the worst case, be pushed towards betraying their country.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. His quote is quite stark. Somebody should consider the risk that another veteran out there with sensitive information in his head in a similar situation would betray our country. I just proved it is possible, but I would rather just die.
Well, he also mentions China.
Yes, he expresses a concern that every veteran who had a security clearance, especially an SCI clearance, China knows our identities. It speaks to a deep anxiety about systemic vulnerabilities linked to veteran data and treatment.
So given all this, what has Mr. Wall actually done? What actions has he taken?
Well, beyond documenting his experiences in research, he mentions using AI tools like ChatGPT to help him research Gulf War illness, which is interesting.
Using modern tools to try and understand his condition better.
Exactly. He also apparently reached out to Genentech
The pharmaceutical company, why them?
because they have an interest in IL-6 mediated diseases. So it looks like he was trying to find interest or potential collaboration outside the VA system, focusing on that scientific pathway.
And he took his case to the intelligence community, as mentioned.
Yes, aligning with those national security concerns he raised.
What specifically is he asking for now? What are his requests?
They seem pretty clear. An immediate investigation into the VA's handling of Gulf War veterans, covering the alleged research suppression, the prescribing practices like topiramate.
Okay, a broad investigation.
Yes. Also, an independent review of his own medical case, ensuring his ER access is restored and the past events are properly documented.
And finally,
A comprehensive review of VA research funding practices. He wants transparency and accountability there, too.
and those communications with ONA, what was happening there?
It seems like he was sharing his findings, trying to connect with some external group that might be working on legal or policy changes for veterans.
But maybe with some hesitation.
It appears so. The document suggests he remained very focused on his scientific evidence, perhaps a bit skeptical or cautious about broader theories that Ona or her group might have been discussing, theories less grounded in the specific biological mechanisms he'd researched.
Right, sticking to his core findings.
Seems that way.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. This deep dive into Daniel Wall's materials. It paints a really complex and frankly disturbing picture.
It really does. You have these core allegations of systemic negligence, maybe even misconduct, within the VA system related to Gulf War veterans.
Layered on top of that is a plausible, though complex, scientific argument connecting organophosphate exposure to chronic illness via choline uptake and IL-6.
Then you have his specific, harrowing accounts of interactions, the medication issues, the alleged denial of care, the truly alarming claim of record erasure.
And overarching all of this are these significant national security concerns he believes arise directly from how veterans like him are treated.
Absolutely. These are, as we said at the start, very serious allegations. They certainly warrant further scrutiny and careful consideration.
Which brings us really to the final thought for you, the listener. When you consider this detailed, troubling account from Daniel Wall, what might it suggest about the hurdles some veterans face navigating the healthcare system?
And perhaps more importantly, what kinds of oversight or accountability mechanisms might be needed? How do you ensure veterans get the care they need? And that claims as serious as these are addressed thoroughly, transparently, and effectively.
There's a lot to think about. We encourage you to reflect on this, maybe look closer at the sources if you have access, or seek out more information on Gulf War illness and veterans' healthcare experiences in general.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.